Hi, self-defense students. A couple of you, at least one of you, missed the first week of class, and a couple of you maybe want to refresh some of the skills here. So I thought I would record this quick little run through. Well, it might not be that quick. We'll see of the different slides we went through. So this is the online version of Self-Defense 101. It's a 6-week progressive skill building class. And the reason I'm doing this is it's really helpful because we're going to build on the skills we practiced this week. We're going to build on them next week. Um, so I'm just going to run through our slides here. Good. So every attacker needs two things. Okay, the first, every attacker needs a target. Um, so over the course of the next 6 weeks, we'll look at some of the ways that attackers select targets. And by the way, there are a few words I use pretty much interchangeably: attacker, assailant, perpetrator, predator. That's all somebody who is basically looking to harm somebody else. Some of them are actually looking to do harm, and that's the thrill of it for them. Others just want what they want, and they're not interested in your consent. So every attacker needs a target. Conventional wisdom used to say that attackers just kind of like laid in wait somewhere and just pounced on the first available person, and we now know that's not exactly what happens. Most attackers do at least some planning, so they have some sense of who they're looking for and some criteria. So here's a little bit of there's a pop quiz that we went through. I'll get to that in a minute. So every attacker needs a target. Every attacker also needs an opportunity. So what does that attacker do in advance? So they masquerade their intent, so you're not really expecting it. And by the time the assault does come, you're surprised, and that delays your resistance. And finally, what do they do to minimize the chance that you're actually going to make a report? So we had a little pop quiz, and the first question was, has the rate of violence over the last 25 years in the United States increased or decreased? That's the rate of violence. And it turns out that the rate of violence in the United States over the last 25 years has gone down. It's at, even considering contemporary events, and this is the year 2020, it's still gone down. And even recently, very recently, the FBI says that most violent crime, except for murder, has gone down in the last year, which is, for a lot of people, really surprising. That's actually not too surprising. Most violent crime is committed by young men between the ages of 15 and 34, or at least a disproportionate share of violent crime is committed by that age group. And over time, as a percent of the population, they're decreasing. The fastest growing demographic is actually people over the age of 85, less likely to be an attacker. Okay, so the rate of assault has gone down. Question number 2: who gets assaulted more often, men or women? This was a little surprising also. The correct answer is men. Now, I've been teaching self-defense for over 25 years. And way back 25 years ago, yes, definitely the rates were higher. And the rate of assault against men was relatively high. Now, as we noticed in the answer to the first question, the rate of assault overall has gone down, but it has not gone down evenly if the target is men versus women. Rates of assault against men have gone down faster than rates of assault against women, which is kind of interesting because there's a different dynamic for assaults against men compared to assaults against women. Okay, next question. Are men more likely to be assaulted by strangers or somebody they know? Or is it even? Well, it turns out that it's kind of a 50-50 chance. Now, 25 years ago, men were more likely to be assaulted by a stranger, but only by a small margin. So that rate has gone down. Now, women, are they more likely to be assaulted by strangers or people they know? And unfortunately, the correct answer is people they know. And that to some people that doesn't make sense because, hey, I know that person. We have friends in common, we have family in common. They wouldn't dare do anything to me. Well, they would, because if you know people in common, and that's one of the main reasons perpetrators, if they're looking for a target, if they're looking for an easy victim, and they're picking women, they're far more likely to pick somebody they know. And an important part about that is you are less likely to distrust them because they're taking the time to groom you. By grooming, I don't mean they're doing your hair and nails. When they take the time to groom you, they're getting you used to them. And that's we're going to come back to that over and over and over again. And if you know them, you are far less likely to report. In fact, you're far less likely to tell anybody. Because you know people in common, and we live in a victim blaming culture, and if you tell people who are also friends with this person that they tried to assault you, they might have some issues with that. So we're going to move on a bit. So every attacker needs a target and an opportunity. You need 4 skill sets for your personal safety, and the first is recognizing when somebody is looking at you like a target. Okay, it's based on what that person is saying or doing, because they just said or did something that got your attention and not in a positive way. And you might feel startled, concerned, maybe a little creeped out, and you're feeling uncomfortable. And you're feeling uncomfortable because what they just did was bump into a boundary of yours. Sometimes people say boundary violation. But we call that recognizing red flags. Other phrases you might hear are trusting your gut feelings, listening to your intuition, following your instincts. Okay, so those all kind of describe the same thing. It's when you get this like visceral jolt that something is off. Okay, now, very often we think of boundary things and boundary bumps as obvious, as big, as violent, or close to violent, or so obvious you can't miss them. And no, this is grooming. Okay, the type of boundary violations that a perpetrator is going to do initially are kind of like pokes. They're littler boundary violations. And sometimes you even wonder, maybe it was so fleeting, so quick, maybe it didn't really happen. You just imagined it. Or maybe you're just kind of being paranoid. Usually that person is so nice, they couldn't have meant it the way it came across, right? Or maybe they say, you're making a big deal out of nothing. What's the issue here? Come on. You're overreacting. Are you PMSing? Maybe you're just a little sensitive. You're concerned maybe other people will begin saying that about you. And by the way, if you hear a lot of stuff like that, that could be another red flag. Now, why do we worry about that? Because, well, never underestimate the need to belong, to fit in. We are social creatures. And we're going to keep coming back to that also. We are social creatures. We have a need to get along with others in our surroundings. And when we don't, we are stressed. Now, over time, though, you might notice with a couple of people in your life that too many boundaries get poked or too many buttons get pushed. And I want you to think for a moment, have you ever had a bad friend? Have you ever had a bad colleague, a bad coworker, a bad fellow student in your class, a bad boss or a bad teacher or a bad coach, somebody who's kind of pushing your boundaries? And I want you to think about what kind of boundaries they pushed and how did you deal with it, or is it an ongoing issue? Now, one thing to know about people who are manipulative, they generally hate it when you set boundaries, when you call them on it. And once you set a couple of boundaries, you'll either experience some pushback, and we'll talk about that later also when we talk about barriers to setting boundaries, or they will just leave to find better opportunities. So a minute ago, I asked, if you've ever experienced somebody manipulative, like a bad friend, a bad coworker, bad boss. What kind of boundaries did they push? How did you finally deal with it? The way most students have said they've dealt with it is kind of indirectly. The relationship just kind of ended. Somebody moved, or they drifted apart, or they just kind of, it was never directly confronted. And for a lot of people, that works fine. And every once in a while, though, I really think, it's a good idea to set boundaries, actually set boundaries. So now what about boundaries? There are several kinds of boundaries. When we think of boundaries, a lot of times we think about how close can somebody stand to you. Think about your space bubble. How close can you let people stand to you? So we had a life before the COVID pandemic. We will have another life after the COVID pandemic. That's not just a 6-foot boundary with almost the whole universe. So when that happens, you'll notice that you let different people come closer to you, and other people, you're happy with them further away. That's the space boundary. And you'll notice people you're closer to physically, you're more comfortable with them standing closer. So you're going to have different boundaries probably with a close relative that you really like than you will with a coworker. You're going to have different boundaries with a best friend than you will with your work supervisor. Okay? And sometimes with people, the person can get close enough to you. What kind of touch? Are you a hugger? Are they a hugger? Is it okay to hug? Is it okay to tap you on the shoulder? What other kinds of contact are okay for different people? So not only do you have different space bubbles with different people, everybody has slightly different space bubbles, even with the same category of person. And that's also really important. The next kind of boundary is a verbal boundary. So there are some things that your best friend probably it's okay if they say to you, but your coworker you barely know, not so much. So think about what can some people say, what some people cannot say. So there are some people who are closer to you can say something that a stranger on the street, it would be totally inappropriate. Okay, and visual, that's creating the environment that we see, because vision is one of our prime senses, and of all our senses, that has actually the biggest amount of space in our brain. So visual, what can somebody show you? So when I was like a teenager, what people were afraid of was the flasher. And you probably have heard of flashers. They're these kind of like scuzzy dudes who have these old tattered trench coats, and they hang out in dark alleys waiting for young girls to walk on by. And when a young girl does, they leap out and they fling open their trench coat and expose their junk. Do those people still exist? Yeah, they do. But modern technology has opened up that kind of experience to a wider range of different people. And now people can send unsolicited photos of their genitals to anybody they want to. Why would anyone do that? It's a power thing. Okay, it's basically somebody saying, I have the power to do this. It's like, you might have had the experience you're on public transportation and there's a guy sitting like across from you who's masturbating. Okay, why is he doing that? It's a power thing. I mean, it's kind of like this like little sense of he's getting away with something because probably no one's going to call him on it. Okay, and that's also a visual boundary violation. So those are the three main kinds of boundary violations. Okay, let's see. Oh, so a boundary violation that kind of bridges verbal and visual is if you're dating somebody and they're pressuring you to text them sexually explicit photos of yourself, and you're reluctant to do that. And regardless of you saying no, 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 they're saying, oh, come on. If you don't, somebody else will. So that's a big boundary violation. So we can talk about that particular thing later. So you need your first skill set is recognizing red flags, which are boundary violations. Now, your second skill set is repairing those boundaries, and that's called your exit strategy. And that has under its umbrella 3 skills of its own. Using your voice, and that's your most important safety tool. And yet, that's the one most women are most reluctant to use. Okay. Second is using your body language, open and expansive body language, which is assertive body language. It means taking up more of your space bubble. Okay, and the key elements here are expansive, which is taking up that space around you. Open, which means you're not crossed, your hands aren't folded, your hands are not stuck in your pockets, your feet aren't crossed. In fact, your weight should be 50-50 on, weight is distributed evenly across your feet, and your feet are shoulder width apart. That's part of expansive body language. Also, eye-to-face contact. You don't have to stare right into somebody's eyes. That can be creepy. But you want to look at their face. You can look at the tip of their nose, the bridge of the nose, the cheekbone, something like that. Okay? And also controlling your smile. Think about this a moment. Who do you like to smile at? Who do you want to smile at? A few people say, oh, I like to smile at anybody. Well, that's fine. Some people say, I smile at my family. I smile at my friends. I smile at small children. I smile at my pet. You often want to smile at people you know, like, and want to encourage. If you're setting a boundary with somebody, you probably don't want to smile at them. That's probably going to send a mixed message. So now the third skill set. So we looked at using your voice, using your body language. The final one is using your feet, and that's controlling the distance between you and the other person. Okay? It could be as simple as just taking half a step back when you're talking with somebody. It could be, getting up from your seat on the bus and finding a different seat. It could be leaving the room. And yes, it can actually mean sprinting as fast as you can. The third skill set for effective personal safety is fighting skills. This is what most of us think of when we hear the phrase self-defense. We think of, hitting, impacts, things like that. The struggle, the confrontation, the anger, the escalation. Now, these are the skills you hope you never have to use, but if you need to use them, your goal is to safely escape. And at this point, you're going to need to physically disable that attacker so they cannot follow you. That doesn't mean you're going to put them in a wheelchair the rest of their life. It just means that they can't follow you for how long it takes you to safely escape. If you need to use your physical fighting skills, you have to give it 110%. There's no such thing as a warning shot in self-defense. And most students, in fact, never need to use these skills, but they're happy they learned them. Mostly because if you know you have a backup plan, you have a lot more confidence in setting those boundaries. And when you have more confidence in setting boundaries, that kind of that spills over and that shows. And the other person is then more reluctant to push those boundaries. So you can project more confidence when you have that backup plan B. Now, your fourth skill set for personal safety is self-care. It's what can you do to deal with nasty situations, either in the moment or afterwards. So self-care is a critical part of effective safety planning. And after any assault, regardless of the outcome, people who've been targeted often report feeling isolated and stripped of their self-determination. So those are really important things for our resilience and our well-being. And self-care covers a wide range of options and actions. So the one level of self-care is self-soothing behaviors. And that's some things that you do to kind of help calm yourself, to help regulate your emotions. And that could be just saying, okay, this person just said something that they're trying to push my buttons. I'm going to stop and I'm going to count backwards from 10, or I'm going to just take a long, deep breath before just blurting out an answer, something like that. but also it can be afterwards. It could be what you do to keep yourself calm. So we have a few options here on the screen. I've always wondered how the trainer got that little dog to sit still with the cucumbers on its eyes without the dog eating them. Good doggy. Um, but some kinds of self-soothing behaviors are very helpful, help increase your health and your choices and your resilience. Others not so much. So meditation, exercise, talking with another person, we're going to get to that, as that's one we're going to focus on in this class. Other forms of self-soothing behaviors might not be so healthy. A percent of people who need self-soothing behaviors engage in like drug or alcohol abuse. Some of them engage in self-harm, higher risk for suicide attempts and suicide, higher risk for depression, higher risk even for common infections like the cold. So you want to, and that's one reason you're interested in self-care, you want to kind of minimize the emotional tsunami that happens after assaults. And even things that are normally healthy, like meditation or exercise, when somebody engages in too much of it, and there is too much of it, that can also be very unhealthy. Then there's other like self-care that is like long-term good for you, healthy, like the right amount of meditation, treating yourself well, like going to a spa and getting a cucumber relaxing thing. Exercise, a lot of people say that is really good. Music. Some people say, oh, I just go onto YouTube and find funny cat videos, or I go onto TikTok and I watch all these really cool dances, or some people engage in artwork. So there's a whole variety of things. In fact, there's music therapy and art therapy to help people deal with life stresses. Let's see, what else do we have? Oh, also good eating, positive connections with other people. Those are important. Now, the next level of self-care is recognizing when maybe yourself needs a little bit of help and you look for professional care. Maybe you do need to see a medical practitioner. Maybe you do need to see your massage therapist or your acupuncturist. Maybe you do want to speak with an attorney or with law enforcement or with a victim assault service person. That can really be super helpful. Now, your professionals, and actually anyone in society, the next level of self-care is institutional care, because all your professionals generally are like certified or trained or something like that, and there's some standards that they're held to. And there are organizations that actually do research and look into what are best practices in our community for our field. So that's important. Next level of self-care, and this gets more removed, that's like structural and societal care. What do we mean by that is that, well, where do we as a society put our resources? And that also can be pretty important. One thing about Washington State is we're like close to the bottom in the United States of how much money we spend per person for mental health. We're like number 47 or 48. So that kind of tells us like where our priorities are. Now, this could also be a little more important in some ways. Let's see if I can, yes. So what gets funding? Does healthcare get funding? Does mental health care get funding? And for whom does it get funded? That's also pretty key. So most of the time we're going to be more concerned about like self-soothing behaviors and self-care. But the others do affect the kind of choices we have for self-soothing behavior and for self-care. Like, for example, if you live in a municipality where if the police are called to your house for domestic violence and you happen to be a renter and the police show up because a neighbor called, and you're at risk for being evicted because that's the law. And yes, there are places in the United States that have those laws. Are you going to call for the police for domestic violence? Probably not. Now, if you've been sexually assaulted, but you don't think the police are going to really take it seriously, are you going to report to the police? Again, that's not very likely. And if you choose to, I would highly recommend you contact either King County Sexual Assault Resource Center or Harborview Sexual Assault and Trauma Unit and talk to a sexual assault advocate, because they will help you, because law enforcement doesn't, they have a public relations issue and they don't do very well with sexual assault survivors. Um, but in the meantime, but making a human connection is really key, because people who've been assaulted often feel isolated and their self-determination has been eroded. So reforming human connections is really key, really important. I worked for about 12 years with women veterans dealing with long-term post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of sexual assault while in military service. It wasn't pretty. And probably one of what I saw as the most problematic symptom of what they were going through was their struggle having healthy long-term relationships with other people, because we are such social creatures. So you want to be able to talk with other people, and if you've been traumatized, find somebody you can talk to. It might be a professional, and that's perfectly fine. If it's somebody who's a friend or a family member, I have like a little three-prong approach. You want to talk to somebody who you trust and who is supportive, but we live in a victim-blaming culture. So let's go over, what does it mean they'll be supportive? Okay, so the first of three, they'll listen to you. And I don't mean they're going to listen to you for 90 seconds and then say, hey, hang on a sec. Did you try? You could have done, you should have done, I would have done. Okay, thank that person for their time, move on. It doesn't mean they're a bad person. It just means they either don't have the social skills or the emotional bandwidth at that time to support you. And they might not be a bad person, but that doesn't mean they're going to be supportive. Go find somebody else. Instead, you might hear something like, "Oh my God, that sounds horrible. I'm so sorry you had to experience that. I'm here to support you. What can I do to help you? I really, if you can't think of anything now, that's fine. Just know that that I'm supportive of you and I want to help." Okay, that sounds a bit better. Especially if they follow through with it, that would be even better. Okay, so that's number one. They listen. Number two, they believe you, and that's really important. And this is probably one of the most significant reasons about perpetrators picking people they know, because they're likely to have friends or family or colleagues or something like that in common. So if you tell somebody else in the group, they might be conflicted, and they might think, wait a moment, Dave? No, Dave wouldn't do something like that. And they may be trying to wrap their head around the fact that one of their friends just told them that another one of their friends is like a perpetrator. And it might take them a little while. So, if you talk to somebody and they don't believe you, that could be it. Or maybe they just don't believe you. As I said, we live in a victim blaming culture. And if you hear things like, wait a minute, are you sure? Maybe it was a misunderstanding or a miscommunication. Are you sure maybe you're not trying to just get that person in trouble? Maybe you don't have to thank this person, but find somebody else. They're not going to be supportive. And the final thing is, so they listen, they believe you, and they will say it wasn't your fault. Okay? It was not your fault because Nobody ever asks to be assaulted. Period. End of sentence. Okay, now we're going to skip a little bit. We're going to go into like ground rules. And you should have received, when you registered for this class, an email that had a couple of sheets on like, technical things to make your experience a little bit better, but also a set of ground rules. And if you haven't, I will send you a set of ground rules. Just let me know. But one of them is this class is a no victim blaming zone. So just want to make that really clear and upfront. Okay. So to recap, your 4 skill sets for effective personal safety: recognizing the red flags, which are boundary violations, your exit strategy, physical fighting skills, and self-care. Okay, so I believe the next part of class were introductions. That was the first class. We're not going to do introduction. We might do some introductions in the second class. So now, what is self-defense? It's anything you do to keep yourself safe or safer. And we're going to go over some bit about that a bit later. Okay, but right now what I want you to do is think about, because most people who take a self-defense class have already thought about safety. This is not your first time thinking about it. Okay, it's already been a concern. I want you to think right now about what are some of the things that you do to keep yourself safe. Where do you feel more safe? Where do you feel less safe? What are some of the differences? Okay. Now, this is an online program. And because it's online, there's some advantages to online and there's some disadvantages. And one big disadvantage is the person's, is the attention. Okay. If you have a family or friends in your household who maybe are not, as considerate, they're not walking around on tiptoes, or you have small children in the house, it can be very distracting. Sometimes pets can be a little distracting. Now, this has been going on for 6 months, so I think a lot of us are kind of over this. Do I really look that way on the video? I am so over that by now. Has my neck always looked like that? I think that's the bright green thing over here. Yeah, I don't care anymore. I'm also done checking out other people's houses. But, the thing is, there are a lot more distractions. It's a lot easier when you're in a classroom. It's kind of hard to do something else. On Zoom, I can't tell if you're reading your email. I can't tell if you're checked out. Sometimes people keep their video off. One time I taught this class, and there was one young lady who turned her video off, and turns out she had, her computer was on, but she certainly wasn't in front of it. So you can do that. And this is a continuing education class, and you will get out of it what you put into it. A body language. If you want to get up anytime, by the way, walk around, go ahead. Pause the video, you can come back to it. That's the beauty of video. So this is a marketing piece that I had done, a number of years ago, and I asked the artist for some very specific things: open, expansive body language and eye-to-face contact. Now, body language: take up your space bubble, open, expansive stance, feet shoulder width apart, hands visible and ready. I'm originally a New Yorker. I talk with my hands. They're not cross-clasped. Open your pockets, eye-to-face contact, and control your smile. Okay? So your feet can be shoulder width apart. You can be standing with your hands on your hips, kind of like Wonder Woman. And the video I'm going to ask you to watch for your homework is by Dr. Amy Cuddy, and she talks about her power pose, the Wonder Woman stance. And that's one way of open, expansive body language. Okay, so that's pretty important. Now, Let's see. Let's take up my little notes. There we go. Now, body language is important and it works very closely with your voice. They are like really super connected because when we talk, we want our body language to convey the same message, and that reinforces it. Now, when we're setting a boundary, what a lot of us do is we feel uncomfortable setting a boundary, so we try to soften it. And what we think of as softening it actually is sending a mixed message. So when we feel the other person isn't listening to us, what I want you to think about is how can I reinforce what I'm trying to say? I mean, sometimes that other person just out and out doesn't care. And they want what they want, they don't care what you want, and they're not going to really care about your boundaries anyway. But if you think the other person does, think about how can I change how I set boundaries a little bit. Now, have you ever felt uncomfortable about and wanted to set a boundary, but you didn't? What were some of the barriers? Think about it for a moment, and I'm just going to read off a bunch of the barriers. Fear of offending somebody, fear of seeming rude or seeming bitchy or nasty, fear of coming across as ungrateful for all the other person has done for you. And if they remind you of that, then maybe they're trying to, extort you a little bit. Fear of losing a friendship, fear of retaliation, gossip, or backstabbing, coming across as too sensitive or a drama queen or overreacting, making a big deal of nothing, fear of being seen as paranoid. So the other person is trying to push buttons of inadequacy, trying to make you maybe feel guilty when you set a boundary of your own. And it's a tactic to try to convince you to acquiesce, to give up your own power. Okay? So now we're going to address like one of these right now. Okay? We are going to address the fear of coming across as rude. So this is kind of a formula. Okay? Now, this is when you want to say no to somebody. They ask you, can you do this for me? Can you do that for me? Can you help me with this? And you want to say no, but how do you do that? Okay, they make you an offer. Hey, let's go to Tukwila for the weekend. Okay, and you don't want to say, you don't want to put them down. You want to. This is when you want to preserve the relationship. So this is the formula. This is like most of these have two phrases in them. Each sentence has two phrases, two clauses. The first one tends to validate and build up the other person, and the second is saying that you is saying no. Now, there are two words that are prominently absent from these. One of them is sorry. Now, sorry is a very important word in the English language. And sorry should not necessarily be popping up when you're setting a boundary. Okay? You probably have many things in your life you could be sorry for, but enforcing a boundary should not be one of them. The second word is but. You can either replace it with nothing, a blank, or you can say and. Okay, so we'll go over some of these, and I want you to repeat after me, and maybe even use your body language. Take up a little more space as you say this. Okay, so repeat after me. Thank you for asking. I won't be accepting the offer. That's so kind of you, and no thanks. That doesn't work for me right now. Thank you for thinking of me. I won't be able to participate. That sounds amazing. I can't make that commitment. I so do appreciate you wanting to help, and I have to decline your offer. I get it. You're tired of staying in, and I feel this is the safest option for me. Now, if the other person asks, well, why won't you be accepting the offer? You can just shrug and say, I just won't be. Okay? I just can't participate. Once you start, getting sucked in, we're going to talk about the conversation web really soon. Now, the reason we leave out the word but is when you say but, thank you for asking, but I won't be accepting the offer. Or thank you for asking, but that's so kind of you, but. You're basically minimizing that first part. So you don't want to minimize that. You want to emphasize, you're such a nice person. Thank you for offering to do that for me. I won't be accepting it, but what you want to do is like tell that person how wonderful they are. Now, we're going to move on. So you notice these are a little bit shorter. This is when you're not wanting to necessarily build them up. Maybe this is somebody who's violated boundaries a number of times, or the boundary they're violating is more egregious. Okay? So, again, I want you to repeat after me and think about your tone of voice and think about what is your face doing. Are you smiling? Are you giggling? Are you having a hard time with this? Sometimes people have a hard time with all of these. Okay? Sometimes people say, oh, that feels so good, but it feels kind of awkward and weird, and that's okay. Practice. Okay, so repeat after me. No. Stop. I said no. I don't want to talk to you. That's not your concern. Put my phone down. Don't read my emails. Don't touch my hair. I don't want to go out with you. Okay, so you can practice with them until they sound more natural. Until you feel more comfortable saying them. Nope. Okay, so now a couple of other things. So you've probably had this experience. You're having a conversation with another person and they're standing too close to you. Okay? So here are 3 different things you could say. You might not choose to start with back off. And you can very often yell back off. So now I'm going to illustrate that. I'm going to yell back off. But I'm giving you, this is one of the good things about doing an online class. I'm giving you a few seconds to, if this is going to be upsetting or triggering, turn down the volume of your device now. Okay? Or stick it under a pillow or something like that. But I'm going to use my voice really loud on the countdown. 3, 2, 1. Back off! Okay. You can turn your volume back up again. So, if you're having a conversation with somebody, why are they in your space? Okay, so there are several reasons. One is they may have a smaller space bubble than you do. Maybe they think that's normal and fine and feels good to them. It might not feel good to you. But maybe you want to let them know that. Okay? Maybe they want to say something to you they don't want other people around to hear. Or maybe they're hard of hearing or they think you're hard of hearing. Maybe it's a noisy environment. Maybe they are trying to intimidate you. Or maybe they feel that, hey, we have a close relationship, but maybe you don't feel the same way. Maybe they're trying to test your boundaries. Now, do you have to go through that list, memorize it, and say, which one of these is it? No, because the thing you should be looking for is, am I uncomfortable? And if the answer is yes, the exact reason is far less important. You want to take up more space. So we're going to try on these options. We're not going to try on the back off part right now, but we're going to do, you're in my space, please back up. And my space bubble is bigger than yours. I'm more comfortable back here. You might want to change some of the words a little bit. Some people don't like the phrase space bubble. You can replace personal space. Okay? But this is what I want you to do. This is another repeat after me. Okay? Make eye-to-face contact. Don't smile. Okay? You're in my space. Please back up. Make sure you're taking open, expansive body language. Let's do that again. You're in my space. Please back up. One more time. You're in my space. Please back up. Okay, now, this next one is a little different because it's 2 clauses in a sentence. It's a bigger sentence. But in between those 2 clauses, you're going to do something. You're going to move back, okay? You're going to take one foot and move it back, okay? So You have 1 foot forward, 1 foot back, and you're going to bring your hands up in front. Now, most students, when I ask, what do you do when somebody stands too close to you when you're talking? The single biggest answer is nothing. Why? Because they figure, well, the other person's an okay person. I'm not that uncomfortable, and it's not worth making a big deal out of. Okay. And that is totally your choice. Now, sometimes people do say, well, the second most common thing, and this is like a long shot second, is I step back. And then I ask, does that work all the time? And most people say, well, not really. So next time you do that, you just take a step back, talk with your hands, bring your hands in front, because now you're taking up that space in front of you where the rest of your body used to be. So you're still claiming that space for yours. Okay? And the third group is they actually say something. Usually they say, hey, bubble. Okay, it's usually teenagers. Okay, hey, that's a bubble thing. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to say, my space bubble is bigger than yours. Then we're going to take a step back and then say, I'm more comfortable back here. So what this is doing is basically, you're not saying, hey, you did something wrong. You got in my space. Here's how you're going to fix it. You're just saying, oh, my space bubble must be bigger than yours. I'm going to fix it by stepping back. Okay? So let's try this. Repeat after me. You're in my, my space bubble is bigger than yours. I'm more comfortable back here. And again, my space bubble is bigger than yours. I'm more comfortable back here. Okay, let's do that a third time. My space bubble is bigger than yours. I'm more comfortable back here. Now, you might find you have a preference for one of those. They're all good tools in the right situation. Okay? Any of them. So, now, what about the parting shot, the broken record, and the conversation web? So let's say you've expressed your boundary to that person standing so close to you, but the other person seems a little offended, and they verbally challenge you like, what, do I smell bad? What's the issue? It was okay yesterday, it was okay the day before, it was okay for the last 5 years. What's different now? So, let's say you said, hey, I think my space bubble is bigger than yours. I'm more comfortable back here. And then you hear this barrage of like, blah, blah, blah. You can just, you just say, I'm just more comfortable back here. Okay? And the other person said, well, it's fine with Alice. It's fine with Chris. Why not you? What's your problem? You can just say, I'm just more comfortable back here. You're just too sensitive. I'm just more comfortable back here. I thought we were friends. And I'm more comfortable back here. You're making a big deal out of nothing. I'm just more comfortable over here. That's just rude. You're nasty. You know that? What a bitch. No wonder nobody likes you. Well, I'm just more comfortable back here. So that's called the broken record, saying the same thing over and over again in a relatively even, calm tone of voice. Now, the parting shot is what you're hearing from the other person. The parting shot really doesn't have anything to do with you. It has to do with the other person not getting their way and getting a little pissy about it. And the conversation web is what they're trying to suck you into. So they're trying to say, but why? Okay, and now some people you do owe an explanation to. But you've undoubtedly been in conversations with people and you left feeling emotionally beat up. What probably happened is that they demanded you justify yourself, and every time you did, they told you why you were wrong. Okay? That's the conversation web. And very often that's what the person is trying to suck you into. Okay? And the broken record kind of short circuits the conversation web because you're not giving account to that other person. Okay? And that's pretty key to remember, keep in mind. Okay? So, let's see. Now, most boundary setting is done in conversational tones. When do you want to get loud? You want to get loud when you want to attract attention. You want to get loud when you think the other person has you pegged as easy to intimidate, and they're about to do it. And you want to get loud when you're going to hit the other person. So that's going to bring us to physical skills. Okay, and these are the skills you hope you never have to use. There's no substitute for them. Your only goal is to escape safely and give it everything you got. You can read the slide, right? Okay, so physical skills. So we are going to look at strikes to what are called decisive targets. Okay, and these have the best chance of disabling the attacker long enough for you to escape. Those are the eyes, the nose, the throat, the solar plexus, okay, which is your sternum, the breastbone. Go down, there's no more bone. Solar plexus is right under there. The groin and the knees. Okay, now, when you are going to hit somebody, you're going to be in what's called the bus rider stance. So your feet are shoulder width apart, but one foot is back. If you are right-handed, it's your right foot that's back. If you're left-handed, it's your left foot that's back. So that's pretty much it for week 1. And hopefully this helps catch you up. And hopefully you can do some practicing with the verbal skills. And we will see you. And you'll be ready just to kick off into week 2.